Hi folks, I'm Mark Hasiuk. You're watching The Mark Hasiuk Show on Roadkill Radio. Prostitution is a daily tragedy in Canada and around the world. It's an evil industry, often run by organized crime, patronized by Johns from all walks of life, victimizing women and children. In Vancouver, particularly in the downtown east side, prostitution flourishes under the disinterested eye of government and the police. A March 2012 decision by the Ontario Supreme Court, which struck down Canada's prostitution laws, further averted the gaze of cops, and now in the downtown east side, a taxpayer-funded social housing provider, Atira, announced last month what many already knew. Atira is running brothels in their social housing buildings, catering to pimps and johns and offering quick fix snake oil to women who feel they have no other choice. Tonight's guest strides on the front lines of this battle. Trisha Baptie is the founder of Eve, a nonprofit of former sex industry women who advocate and lobby for the abolition of prostitution. She joins us from Ottawa, where tomorrow she'll be speaking as a keynote at an MP breakfast about prostitution issues. Miss Baptie, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Before we get into this whole Atira thing and some of the issues in Vancouver, you're the expert. What is an abolitionist when it comes to prostitution?
An abolitionist is someone who challenges patriarchy, and challenges patriarchy in the way that we're challenging the idea that men deserve to be able to purchase sex on their terms at all times. We say that women are actually funneled into prostitution because of systemic issues, and it's the systemic issues we need to be dealing with rather than catering to the male demand for paid sexual access to women and children's bodies.
And again, to set some terms of reference, because we're going to be talking about this, what is the Nordic model? That's something that a lot of abolitionists subscribe to and they would like to see come here to Canada. Tell us what the Nordic model is.
So the Nordic Model of Law is a model of law that started in Sweden in 1999. In the 90s, Sweden had legalized prostitution in the 70s and 80s. And during the 90s, they realized that legalization, decriminalization had none of the positive efforts they hoped it would have. So at a particular moment when their parliament was pretty much 50-50, they went back to the drawing board and they looked at prostitution again, but through a very different lens. And they looked at it through the lens of violence against women. And so in 99, they had a three-pronged approach for dealing with prostitution. The first was to criminalize the purchasing of sexual services. Right. Pimping, trafficking, all of that was criminalized. But what was very different is that the prostituted persons were decriminalized. They were seen as victims and seen as to be out there because of a perfect storm of inequality that drove them there. Mm-hmm. The second thing they also did is they had a huge ad awareness campaign all over their metro buses, their subways, and newspapers, on TV. It talked about purchasing sex is not only a crime, but it's also a form of violence against women, and it actually degrades women as equal people. Mm-hmm. And the third thing they did was have very progressive exiting services for women who wanted to leave. And unlike Canada, they have a welfare rate that is livable. And by livable, I mean be able to live with a decorum of dignity and be able to feed your children, house yourself in safe and adequate housing, have clothes on your back. I'm not talking about, driving a Mercedes-Benz. It's about being able to provide the most basics that we're afforded in life. So
what happened after the Swedish government installed these policies known as the Nordic Model? Yeah. What happened in Sweden?
So they saw a very immediate drop in men looking to purchase sexual services. There's a study out of London, in Eves. And the number one thing that this study looked at men who buy sex, who they buy and what they know is the name of the study. And the number one thing that the study said is that if men were to be punished legally for purchasing sex, they would stop. So when Sweden passed these laws, they noticed a dramatic drop in the men who were purchasing sexual services. The other thing that happened that they didn't expect was that human trafficking exponentially dropped in their country. When I was in Sweden in September, we got to hear Interpol tapes where you can hear organized crime saying, don't go to Sweden, there's no place to sell them. Them, of course, being women, human beings. And their red light district, which was, a big portion of their downtown core, when I went to go see it in September, it is now about a quarter of a block long, and at maximum has 11 to 15 women who are going out every night.
Our guest is Trisha Baptie, founder of EVE, a non-profit abolitionist organization. Ms. Baptie, the Nordic model, one of the most intriguing things to me about the Nordic model, being a guy who grew up in America, in North America, living a very sports-oriented life growing up. I spent a lot of time in dressing rooms. I know how guys are. I know how they talk. I know how ignorant we can be. The most intriguing thing to me about the Nordic model is that the public relations campaign to tell folks, men, about the realities of prostitution and to humanize the people who are sold. And we have all these public awareness campaigns, way too many in my opinion, sponsored by the federal government, participation, all this stuff. My goodness, wouldn't it be nice to see this federal government who claims so much to be on the side of law and order, to put something like that out there? That would do more good than any legislation that would. And I'm not saying I don't want the legislation that would criminalize the men, but getting the hearts and minds of people is what this is all about, is it not?
It is. It is about affecting change in the attitudes of men towards women. I mean, I always say, 30-some years ago when I was growing up and my dad would beat my mom, it was up to my mom to press charges against him, which of course she never did, right? Yeah. She couldn't leave. She had nowhere to go. So we just lived in it. But now, at some point, the government said, that's not fair. And Crown Council now charges domestic abuse partnerships and takes it out of the hands of women and says it's a crime against society and we're going to press charges against you. So when I phoned the police on my abusive ex, it wasn't up to me to make those decisions, and they automatically charged him and they took him away. And that's truly what we need the law to be doing, our government to be doing, our social services agencies to be doing, is to be standing up for the most vulnerable and the most marginalized and saying this cannot happen to you anymore, not on my watch. And change the way, if we do that, we fundamentally change the way men and women relate.
And no more do we see the marginalized. There's no greater marginalized area in our hometown here in Vancouver than in the downtown east side. And I want to talk about something I've been writing about for a few years now. The Atira Women's Resource Society, headed by Janice Abbott. Miss Abbott's Resource Society and her for-profit subsidiary, Atira Property Management, Inc., runs many hotels in the downtown east side, many of these SROs, where a lot of
stranglehold of them down there.
Yes, she certainly does, and a lot of the women who are prostituted in the downtown east side, who are drug addicted, who have their heads shaved, they live in these hotels. And just last month, as I mentioned in the opening, Atira and Janice Abbott, very proudly, I might add, announced that now her buildings accept Johns into the lobby where they can write on a little guest book and they can go do their thing with the women in the hotel rooms. What is your take on this latest strategy by Atira?
Hugely problematic. I think the public would be outraged to know that social housing, which their taxpayers' dollars are funding, are being used as brothels. It makes it unsafe for the other women living in the hotel. If that, if that date that girl is bringing in has previously abused or something another girl, then he's making her space unsafe. You cannot expect me to believe that men are truly handing over real driver's licenses to be taken down at the front desk.
Hold on, Ms. Baptie. So I just want to tell everybody a little bit more about these. I'd call them policies, but no one voted on them, and you can't get any documentation. Believe me, I've tried, folks. So this is what we hear from their press release and their sham of a report from the Atira people. They have what's called, and I quote, supportive guest policies. So when the John comes in, often shepherded by a pimp, they can receive condoms and sign in at the front desk. And my question to Miss Abbott, if she was ever courageous enough to answer my phone calls, would be, what cooperation does she have with the pimps in the neighborhood? And what does she think of pimps who are selling the women she claims to protect? Yeah. Miss Baptie, what do you say to that?
Well, I say she's not protecting anyone except her own self-interest. If you're protecting women, then you're keeping them out of harm's way of men who want, to sexually abuse them for pay. If we're talking about the most marginalized in society, women who have drug addictions, women who have mental health addictions, women who may or may not have SAS, ADD, like the women living in those shelters or those housing co-ops need to be the most protected. And she's absolutely abandoning them in the name of catering to patriarchy, catering to the male demand for paid sex. I think if you met and talked to some of those women, you would realize that we're not talking about women, and I don't want to put all the women down who are living in those buildings. That's not at all what I'm trying to do.
No, we understand.
Within them, right?
Yeah.
But we have to realize the situation, and I'm not talking about being paternalistic either, but there's no reason, none, that men should be allowed to go into a BC housing building and commit an illegal act of purchasing sexual services from someone else.
There has been no policy change. There has been no law changed. Janice Abbott at Atira and her friends, they've done this unilaterally. And folks, if you're watching at home and you're thinking, well, who do I blame for this? You can start looking at the housing minister, Rich Coleman, and his buddy Shane Ramsey, who runs BC Housing, who happens to be married to Miss Janice Abbott. It's Shane Ramsey and his BC Housing that's funneling all this money to Miss Abbott's hotels. I'm not going to go any further on Atira here because we could do a whole show, and Miss Baptie would be sitting there bored to death because once I get started on Atira,
I'm not bored. I'm just
once I get started on Atira, I can't stop. Trisha Baptie is our guest. She's founder of EVE, a non-profit abolitionist organization. So just to wrap up here, Miss Baptie, the missing women's inquiry is wrapping up in Vancouver. From my perspective, and probably yours, it was not a productive exercise. That's a whole other show. I want to know what you would do if you were put in charge. What would you do in the downtown east side vis-a-vis prostitution and prostituted women? What do we need down there right now?
If I were to be able to stand in front, of Jim Chu and pretend I was him.
Jim Chu, the police chief of Vancouver, yep.
Yeah, and pretend everyone was listening to me rather than him, I would tell everyone to go out and arrest the Johns and arrest predatory men and work on stopping the violence, the horrific level of violence that goes on in the downtown east side on a nightly basis. I would You know, I would just...
You're talking law enforcement. That's what we need.
Yeah, like, it's... The police have got to be standing up for women, and they're not.
Yeah.
They're abandoning them in this false illusion that somehow they're choosing to be prostituted, or they're choosing, you know, to be addicted, or they're choosing something, and that we know is a lie. I know it's a lie. I was there, been there, done that.
Right. The choice for those, the concept of choice for those women is much different than most people.
Yeah, lack of opportunity does not mean someone's choosing it.
Well, unfortunately, Police Chief Chu and others in the downtown east side have bought hook, line, and sinker into the harm reduction philosophy, and it's a hands-off approach. You're exactly right, Miss Baptie. If you start arresting Johns, boy, let me tell you, that 45-year-old who's got the job and the wife and 3 kids, he's not going to come down there anymore, and that word will spread pretty quick.
Really quick, actually. And I think that's what we need to be doing. In order to create a safer society for women in the downtown east side, we have to get rid of the predatory men, and the police know how to do that.
Well, we're going to stay on it, and we know that you and a lot of your allies are going to keep fighting the good fight. Trisha Baptie, founder of EVE, a non-profit abolitionist organization, thanks so much. I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thanks so much for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Trisha Baptie, listen, there's lots of folks out there like Miss Baptie who are taking this fight to the courts, taking it to the court of public opinion. Prostitution is a daily tragedy, and in an advanced country like Canada, there's no need for it. There's no need for street prostitution in the downtown east side. There's no need for teenagers to be invited into government housing and offered up to Johns and pimps. This is Canada. This is 2012. People like Janice Abbott, Police Chief Jim Chu, Rich Coleman, all these folks have to get on board. You're talking about human rights here. This is an issue that we're going to stay on top of here on Roadkill Radio. I promise you that. I'm Mark Hasiuk. You've been watching the Mark Hasiuk Show here on Roadkill Radio. Good luck. God bless. We'll see you next time.